I said this would happen. New waves of protests have broken out across Europe in response to the severe rise in energy costs. They are angry at politicians for waging war on their own people, pointing the finger of blame at European governments who have followed the US into sanctioning Russia over the Ukraine war. Last weekend, people of Paris, Berlin, Prague, and many other cities had their streets filled with people shouting chants of "Leave NATO" and "Our country first." In Paris, some protesters even had banners saying "Resistance" or Frexit, in reference to France potentially leaving the EU. The protesters have denounced NATO, accusing it of warmongering and causing economical destruction. It seems that both European governments and politicians, as a collective and standalone, have no clue on how to combat this energy crisis, and China put it best when they said the Western countries are continuing to fan the flames on the crisis, leading to a vicious cycle. Currently, Europeans are waking up to realize that the sanctions that Europe and the US has put on Russia are causing this severe hike in energy prices, and in turn, it's starting to hurt their own pocket. As always with unrest in government policies, the alternative viewpoint, the alternative parties will for sure be using this to fuel their own agenda to make sure they get elected in the next elections. Meaning Europe's landscape, both politically and economically, could change very vastly and very quickly in the near future. Whichever way you look at it, countries in Europe are really failing in preparing for the severe tough winter that countries and people are about to face as the Ukraine war escalates and continues to get worse. And now with added pressures such as the explosions on the Nord Stream pipeline, which definitely was not carried out by an off-radar P-8 Poseidon US Navy airplane carrying torpedoes in a fully controlled NATO Baltic Sea, and Putin offering Europe more liquefied natural gas and saying exports are ready to go. Biden also is warning price caps could actually backfire, sending energy prices much higher. Gazprom is saying that even if Europe fills its gas storage, it could freeze this winter. The IMF is saying Ukraine needs another $3 billion every single month going into 2023. And Europe's seemingly only answer to help combat a potential severe energy crisis is power plants on boats. Yeah, I'm not making this up. They want to get power plants that are on ships that are usually used in emerging economies to help function Africa are currently going to sail to Europe to help combat this severe energy crisis. And more on these ships later because it's literal idiocracy and also very hypocritical. On Monday, the Global Times had an economist say this: the policies of the EU and NATO are not evolving into a direction that could help solve the actual problem. Now it's the energy crisis, and next it's the security crisis, which will continue causing public panic. Now, European leaders are set to meet again next week in Brussels to talk again about this evolving energy crisis, like it did much good last time they met. But even so, observers are saying there is little they can actually do to stop the crisis. People in European countries such as Czechoslovakia, France, and Germany already started protesting last September. And as time goes on, more and more people are waking up to realize that this cost is all down to governmental policies. A lot of the costs that they are currently facing are due to sanctions that they have imposed on Russia. Now, I know a lot of people will be down in the comments triggered saying this is for the greater good. We have to stand together against Russia. And being honest, I'm absolutely with you. Ukraine has the full rights to defend itself, but Ukraine is not part of Europe, it's not part of the EU, and it's not part of NATO. So you have to ask, at what cost? What is the ultimate limit on support that these nations have an obligation to Ukraine? Obligations that are costing its own people. I honestly feel if this continues, we are facing an absolute overhaul and the Western world will change forever as we know it. And I'm not sure that's for the good. Zelensky just came out and said that he doesn't want to speak to Putin at all. He thinks he's winning the war. In reality, nobody is winning this war. It's just hurting more and more people. Surely now, a sit down and a ceasefire would make more sense for all parties involved, especially given the holiday months and a winter where soldiers and people are literally going to freeze to death. This would allow both nations to sit round a table and have extensive talks on how they can find peace. And every single nation in Europe would benefit from this notion. Dismissing this idea is proving that Zelensky is also being very irrational and irresponsible. It would allow Europe to wean itself off Russian oil and find an alternative solution, because as it stands, Europe's only solution, it seems, to help combat an energy shortage is actually getting Russian oil and gas anyway. This is what Europe should be pushing for: a ceasefire, a halt on the war, and de-escalation, not on sending more aid and current sanctions. Whichever way you look at it, especially in recent days and weeks, the war is intensifying, and many people, not just Ukrainians, are currently hurting. The European people are paying the financial burden of these sanctions and also feeling the effects of the war. And as time goes on and the financial burden gets greater, more and people are going to ask, we didn't vote for this. We didn't vote for the sanctions or the aid to be sent to Ukraine. Protests and unrest are going to continue to rise in Europe. And again, it's a harsh reality. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what's going to happen. Imagine if this war continues for the next 2 years, which is where it's going to head to. Russia will continue sending troops. Ukraine will continue to appease them if Zelensky is in charge and continues with his current mantra. Within the next 2 years, many governments are going to have elections and rotate their governments out. Alternative governments will be elected if the world continues where it is. Now, I am a right-leaning person. Definitely not far right, and definitely not what most people are calling me in the comments of some of these videos. I'm a capitalist at heart, and I think that people who risk their money and employ people and make success of themselves should be rewarded, not punished. Now, many will disagree with this stance. That's fine, but I wanted to just clarify that. But I also think it's logical and a very important factor for governments to go both left and right in terms of elections on a regular basis. That way, you get a very logical, sensible policy, and the governments and the country can prosper. I believe that everybody should listen to the harsh realities and listen to opposing viewpoints so that you can recollect and rethink your thoughts. To denounce anything that you disagree with as fascist or racist or idiotic is just simply itself quite idiotic, and in fact, sometimes quite fascist. Conversation and debate, now more than ever, especially listening to alternative viewpoints, is essential in developing and prospering. And currently, governments, especially European governments, many of them are just sat there with their fingers in the ear, just screaming at the top of their voices, saying they have the moral high ground, and we must unite and suffer the consequences because of Russia invading Ukraine. And being honest, this makes me uncomfortable. Not because of the support, because of their next action. We're gonna go from one extreme to another. People who are not listening to the alt-right. That is what is rising right now in Europe. The longer this war goes on, the longer energy prices and the cost of livings continue to soar, the opposing parties in Europe will be elected. You've seen it happen in Italy, Sweden, and most countries now in Europe have a rising far-right party on the march, using the sanctions as a stepping stone to get themselves elected. And the reality is, it's not necessarily their fault or the people's fault. It's the fault of the leaders who are not willing to listen to their own people. It's all well and good changing your current profile picture to the flag of the nation in need. But when it comes to actually acting out what you preach and what you post on Twitter or Facebook, and it comes down to actually spending money, taking money away from your own family as prices get higher, well, these morals are really going to be tested. If Europe is to survive, and I'm being real here, I think it is a big if at this point, then it needs to really find a solution fast. And even then, it might be too late. I seen this article on Bloomberg recently, and I genuinely couldn't believe the title. The article is titled, "Europe lines up a floating power plant to bolster its winter supplies." Now, I have to laugh on this because about a year or two ago, maybe even before COVID, I actually researched this company because I thought it was a genius idea, putting a power plant onto a ship so that you can help fund a project that might be sort of in a rural area. And this company has actually helped projects in places like Africa and other emerging economies where basically they don't have the infrastructure to power a project. The company itself owns a fleet of ships and is based out of Istanbul. It can offer a variety of fuels too: biodiesel, low sulfur oil, and of course the most logical option in terms of price and actually getting the fuel to you, liquid natural gas. Car Powership says that it has 8 ships currently available and is able to generate up to 2 gigawatts of electricity, which is enough to power 5 million homes. The company is saying that the vessels can provide electricity between 20 and 25 cents per kilowatt hour on the euro, which is about half of the current rate Germany is facing, which would sound like a great help to a struggling nation, especially Germany, who has a severe energy crisis and is even talking of coal power plants. But here's where the mad thing is. These ships are legit. This is an actual genius idea, if it wasn't idiotic and hypocritical, because Turkey, guess where it's getting its natural gas from? Russia. Last year, Russia supplied Turkey with about 44% of its liquid natural gas. And Russia came out recently and said that 25% of its current gas exports to Turkey will be paid in rubles, meaning Turkey's getting a lot of liquid natural gas from Russia. So with this EU ship idea to bail out nations like Germany if winter gets really cold, it's basically just buying Russian natural gas anyway, just adding a third party to the chain, in this case, Turkey, Istanbul, and car power ships, meaning you have to pay somebody else, which economically doesn't make sense. So you have to ask, if they are going to go this route, what's the point in the sanctions? What is the point if you're just going to let Russia sell gas to Turkey and then buy it from Turkey anyway? Surely that's just idiotic. Unfortunately, as it stands, we live in a world of harsh realities, and we have to accept them. Europe does not have an alternative to Russian energy supplies. It doesn't exist. That's it. That's the world we currently live in. And guess what? It's not going to just be this winter. It's going to be next winter and the winter after, unless we can get peace in Ukraine, or at least a ceasefire. And we definitely cannot think of an idea to boost the supplies if we continue to hyper tax and punish energy companies for making a profit. OPEC just cut 2 million barrels of oil a day, which sent oil prices rocketing back up. It's clear OPEC and oil companies want oil barrels, for example, over $80 a barrel, which means they make more profit. That makes sense. You're not going to see sub $80 again for a hell of a long time. And if the European Union and EU states want to continue taxing the oil companies and energy giants that are currently feeding them, they're also going to cut supply and maximize revenues, especially given the high interest rate environment we're currently in. Whichever way you paint it, the harsh reality is this war on fossil fuels, this idea the Western world has been pushing about renewable energy, is far from completion. Why were we listening to the ideas of a 14-year-old girl, and right now it's left us in limbo? We do not have the money to fund the projects. We do not have the technology, the infrastructure, nor the time to continue this right now. We need energy tomorrow because people, again, will literally be freezing to death. It seems that European leaders are walking a tightrope in the dark, and they do not even know where they're heading. And for people like myself, an investor who just wants an economy that's at least trickling along, it's painful to see. Nations in Europe want to claim the moral high ground, but they're not calling for a ceasefire. They're not calling for peace. Like I said, the best quote I have seen is they just want to fan the flames, in turn adding oxygen to the fire. I genuinely cannot see a way out for this. If you've got any idea how Europe can combat the severe energy crisis we're going to have at this point indefinitely, please let me know down in the comments. And don't comment, it's for the greater good. I get that. We all understand that. But really, when people start dying in Europe because of the cold, and by the way, that's not an exaggeration. Old people used to die because they couldn't heat their homes, going back for decades every single year in countries like the UK, France, and Germany. So people will be getting much colder this year, and more people will definitely be dying. Throw in the fact that there's new variants of COVID. Let's just remember there is COVID. Europe's pretty screwed right now. Anyway, I'm getting angry and I need to calm down. It's actually my birthday tomorrow and I'm going to be the ripe old age of 25. So let's have a great dad joke. How do you summarize a date if you went out to eat 8 times before going to see The Dark Knight Rises? This one's a corker. Dinner, 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 Batman. I'm not even sad. That one's actually amazing. Be safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.